I am Gail Glazerman, Senior ESG Integration Analyst in Bloomberg Intelligence. For this month's ESG Bulletin, we will focus on how recent U.S. regulatory and political developments are challenging businesses, some of the initial consequences, and how companies are responding. Later, we will be joined by Anna Moro, the head of our ESG market specialists, who will walk through ways to use our document search function, DSGo, to track and assess how companies are responding to attacks on DAI. In the weeks since returning to office, President Trump has announced a constant stream of regulatory changes with potential ESG implications, and businesses are often finding themselves in a challenging position, squeezed between competing interests and stakeholders. This is happening even though many of these actions are not yet finalized and often being contested in court. In response to President Trump's executive order targeting illegal DEI, a wide swath of companies have scaled back their related programs and changed how they discuss their diversity, equity, and inclusion efforts. Though, as BI recent research shows, in many cases the actual changes are far less dramatic than the headlines. This is particularly evident when reviewing company 10K filings released in the past few weeks. For instance, Coca-Cola now focuses more on the value of diverse perspectives rather than a diverse workforce. Others have cited the political pushback against these activities as an explicit corporate risk in the regulatory filings. These changes have not been without consequences. A group of faith leaders organized a 40-day boycott of Target corresponding with Lent. This is in sharp contrast to Costco, where community leaders coordinated a, quote, boycott, encouraging shoppers to patronize the company after it defended its DEI initiatives. It is worth noting that investors rejected an anti-DEI proposal at Costco's recent annual meeting by a margin greater than 90%. Financial firms are also finding themselves in a bind due to changing ESG stances. Indiana moved $970 million of pension money to State Street from BlackRock, citing BlackRock's alleged ESG commitments. However, State Street lost a £28 billion mandate from the People's Pension and nearly $500 million from Academiker Pension due to perceived reduced ESG alignment. With a group representing $1.5 trillion in pension funds warning that asset managers could be downgraded due to weaker climate stewardship, we note more changes could come. Diversity is not the only ESG element under scrutiny by the new U.S. administration. In March, the EPA launched what it claims is the biggest deregulatory action in U.S. history, targeting review of 31 regulations and rules, including air and wastewater regulations, auto emissions limits, and even the 2009 endangerment finding, which established that GHG emissions threaten public health. It is not yet clear to what extent any of these rollback efforts will succeed, but it is also worth noting that many markets are global, and companies that step back from environmental commitments may find themselves less competitive outside the U.S. For instance, even if the U.S. does weaken auto emission standards, many jurisdictions around the world still plan to phase out gas-powered cars. In our view, U.S. automakers that don't invest in zero-emissions technologies may be rendered non-competitive. Demonstrating potential market response, BYD shares recently surged after announcing novel fast-charging technology, a noted contrast to recent weakness in Tesla shares. However, the U.S. is not the only jurisdiction reviewing some ESG rules and scaling back ambition. The EU recently proposed some delays and changes to some key ESG legislation. As proposed, the number of companies subject to the Corporate Sustainability Reporting Directive, or CSRD, would shrink considerably, and implementation delayed for companies that have not already started. And based on recent proposals, implementation of the CSDDD, which focuses on supply chains for key commodities, will be delayed until July 2028. The scope narrowed to direct suppliers and frequency of monitoring extended to every 5 years from annual. Some of these rules could affect U.S. companies doing business in Europe, so it's worth noting that the new U.S. Commerce Secretary threatened to deploy trade tools to protect U.S. firms, and Senator Hagerty introduced the PROTECT Act legislation aiming to shield U.S. firms from having to comply with the EU CSDDD supply chain legislation. As regulatory reviews are completed and court cases settled, we expect these issues to continue to evolve. I will now turn it over to Anna Moro to discuss how you can use Bloomberg's DS function to assess company-specific changes as well as broader trends related to ESG and specifically DEI pushback.
I am Anna Moro, the head of Sustainable Finance Specialist in the Americas. Today, I want to help you to filter headlines from impact, particularly as it relates to DEI pushback. As Gail mentioned before, presidential orders change DEI initiatives in the US. And I'm going to use our function DS to exemplify how to filter from headlines to company responses. Using S&P 500 as a benchmark of US-based companies, we want to be able to identify the sectors where diversity and inclusion have been mentioned, including sources like curated news. First thing to notice is a jump in Q1 2025. The sectors we identify are financials, communication, and consumer discretionary, leading the crowding of these DEI mentions, highlighting Goldman Sachs, Meta Platforms, and Amazon as the most commented companies in this DEI pushback campaign. Although on a closer look, and excluding as the source news, and being focused solely on research, feelings, transcripts, annual management meetings, sectors pivot. We still have financial as a leader on the mentions, but we add energy and industries that were not captured before with the headlines. I want to emphasize the case of Schlumberger. This is a US company where in its latest 10K, we highlight the value of diversity to foster a strong culture of inclusion. I want to thank your time and ask you to join me and the rest of ESG market specialists to learn how to utilize the terminal for these trend headlines and transcript analysis. Back to you, Gail.
Thanks, Anna. As a reminder to our viewers, more information on this data and topics and much, much more can be found on the terminal by going to BI ESG Go. Thanks for joining us. We'll see you next month.